If you grow up to have a career of making sci-fi or nerdy entertainment, if you will, there's a very good chance that you'll get turned into an action figure by those who have rights to make figures of that property. And George Lucas is obviously very tied into Star Wars, and the idea of making an action figure based on this director of renowned sci-fi is, pretty acceptable these days. And he's had quite a few action figures. It's interesting that it's usually taking something like a stormtrooper and slapping a George Lucas head on it. And also interesting how, as George Lucas gets older, so does the hair color of said action figures. But yes, having an action figure of a real world person who is so associated with the property has become very acceptable in pop culture. And in fact, it's gotten to the point that people actually demand these, which is why we've had multiple George Lucas Stormtrooper figures. Now, most people don't really remember the very first George Lucas Star Wars figure, which was this one, probably because it doesn't look that much like him. It was released as one of the minifigures as part of Galoob's Micro Machine Action Fleet sets. Now, if you fondly remember these sets, which I know I do, these were mostly vehicle, but sometimes you got beasts like a bantha, and it came with some minifigures. And albeit these were actually pretty great minifigures, they were usually only articulated at the shoulders and at the waist with a pivot joint, but for figures that were really just meant to go inside of ships, it was a ship-based line, similar to what Jazzwares is doing right now. Hey, very successful. And most of the ships came with a token 2 figures. So if you bought your TIE Interceptor, you were going to get 2 TIE pilots, because there's not that much that goes with a TIE Interceptor other than a pilot. And to make one of these pilots slightly unique, and actually this was never advertised on package, if you remove the helmet from one of these TIE Fighter pilots, you got George Lucas underneath. So, yeah, it doesn't quite look like George Lucas, but that was the intent. And it was uncovered, I remember, by Entertainment Weekly magazine that ran a whole spread about it. Now, obviously, we have had many George Lucas figures since then, and probably the one that's most justified, shall we say, as far as the content, was this Lucas Collector box, which came with Baron Papanoida. I'm probably butchering the name, but George actually did appear in Revenge of the Sith, along with the rest of his family. His adopted kids were Jedi and other sort of senator aides, etc., etc. And, I mean, heck, if you're George Lucas and you're running an empire like Star Wars, wouldn't you put your kids in it too? I think so. So he did appear on screen, albeit in a much cut-back role. He was going to have a much larger role, and this was expanded in the Clone Wars, although it wasn't voiced by George. But, the character was supposed to be kind of like a rebel spy in the early days of I guess, the end of the Republic and the beginning of the Empire. But yeah, he got himself suited up and make-upped up, and, there he is on screen, and it makes sense that we'd want an action figure based on this. So, an action figure we got. Commander Jorg Sacul, on the other hand, not a character that appeared on screen. So this is George Lucas with slightly less gray hair as an X-Wing pilot. Because much like putting George Lucas's head on a TIE Fighter pilot or a Stormtrooper, it's pretty easy to do. You've got a standard body, you just need to pluck a head on it, and boom, you have a collector's item. Now, this is an interesting George Lucas / X-Wing pilot figure for quite a few reasons, and that's actually why we're getting into this video as we speak. So, let's dive in. Now, he, of course, comes on a standard X-Wing body, which we'll get to in a moment, and he has a removable helmet, which isn't exactly standard at the time, but was slowly becoming standard. So, while we were living in a time when some X-Wing pilots had helmets, others did not, what was really unique about this character was his distribution. One was that he was on a gold-blue card, but two, he was only available at Star Wars Celebration, which is the Star Wars convention, kind of like Comic-Con, but only for Star Wars. If you're watching this channel and this video, you've probably heard of Star Wars Celebration. It usually happens every other year or so, and they move it around the country, and there's always dedicated merch for this show, hence Jorg Sacul being a dedicated figure for Star Wars Celebration 2. Now, the thing is, when this figure came out, I don't want to blame it on the brand managers at the time, but it really, I don't think, was quite clear how dedicated and passionate action figure fans are. And you'll notice as the years have gone by, we haven't really gotten another 3 3/4 action figure dedicated to this show. We've gotten other 3 3/4 figures, like the next year at Celebration 3, we got a Darth Vader commemorating Revenge of the Sith, but it was an existing figure. The only thing that was unique was the packaging and the base, although it did get, I believe, James Earl Jones recording original dialogue saying, welcome to Celebration 3 or something like that. But, again, you're paying for an accessory, not an original figure. Later on, any figures that were released at Celebration were then also released in other ways, like at San Diego Comic-Con or online, so that fans who didn't make it out to the show could still complete their collection. And that was kind of the issue with Jorg Sacul, is as an original figure and a original trilogy figure, sort of, there was a lot of people upset that they couldn't get this character. That's why later on, exclusives were just packaged-only iterations of figures you already had. It was just a unique package at Celebration 2. Or slightly unique deco versus an original character that you could only get at the show. To say fans were pissed off that they couldn't get this to complete their collection is an understatement. It also introduced the new branding that was going to go forward for the next few years. So, yeah, again, we were definitely dealing with an odd figure that was released in an odd way, and I think the brand managers overseeing it at the time, who were probably long gone at this point, didn't realize how much releasing an original character from the original trilogy was going to upset fans who couldn't get it. Now, you should also notice, besides the removable helmet, he also is the only X-Wing figure to come with an X-Wing. Now, let's talk about the removable helmet first. We had moved into a phase now, thanks to Porkins, where X-Wing characters, or Y-Wing, other Rebel pilots, were now going to have removable helmets. This is very contrary to what was done previously, where the figures had their helmets molded onto their head. So Jorg Sacul, George Lucas backwards, get it how the name works, he did get an original head, but it was put on the old Biggs body, since that was the only actual X-Wing body we had at the time, noting that the Luke X-Wing from Power of the Force 2 was actually a snowspeeder pilot. And as I noted, he's the only Star Wars figure ever to come with a micro machine, which I thought was really cool. Ever since Hasbro bought Galoob, I thought this would be an awesome way to do pack-ins. The character has also become so popular, I guess you could say, that people have done 6-inch and 3 3/4 custom versions of the figure, adding articulation, adding detail to sort of modernize the figure. So, hey, maybe we'll still get more Jorg Sacul figures. Anything could happen. But, if you want to have a collection of George Lucas figures, he's an essential part of that. And if you like X-Wing fighter pilots, as I know I do, he became a character I had to track down.